All right, happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to another Learning Tech Talks where we are continuing to explore the landscape of learning technology while cutting through the fluff and getting your questions answered. Today, I'm actually joined by two people, but you can't see one because literally right before the countdown, they disconnected. So, Huw Newton-Hill is here with me, but he's not, but he will be, so keep an eye out because he's coming back in, and we'll just throw him into the mix when he comes back. He'll be ready for this. But I'm also joined by Greg Hull, and they are both from Attensi, and we're going to be talking about game-based learning, immersive learning. We'll probably get into the metaverse. We're going to get into simulations. We're going to be a bit all over the place. So it's going to be a fun conversation, though, because a lot has changed since they joined. See, they were on a year ago, so bringing back a lot to update on that. But with that, let's get into some of the fun and some of the stuff we've got planned ahead. So let's get into just some of the questions, which first off, and again, when Huw comes, you'll see him back in the feed. So Greg, it's just you and I for now. We're just going to duo this thing until Huw joins. He's actually, well, I won't spoil this because he'll tell us when he comes back. But where are you today in the world?
Today in the world, I am in London.
Okay.
So London, UK. It's as cold and grey as you would expect it to be right now.
Okay. All right. Well, you know what's interesting is similarly here, it is cold, gray. Is it snowing? Are you in snow season yet?
We've had bits of snow, but not today. But it looks like it's going to
Okay.
over the next couple of weeks.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it's we had like a dusting last night, so it's a bit chilly here, but it looks like it's gonna all melt anyway. So similar situation for me as it is for you. I'm in Waukesha, Wisconsin, where I always am, joined by my friendly houseplant Fred. Nothing new here. So let's also shift over, and I'm excited to hear this because you've put some deep thought into this question. So I'm really curious where things are at. And oh wait, here we go. Huw is back in the stream. Wait, you have to answer the question now because it's going to explain why you disappeared and then came back in. So Huw, where are you in the world today, and why does your internet keep acting goofy?
Well, I'm in South Africa, and I'm in a very beautiful part of South Africa. But I am somewhat forced to stay here by the latest strain of the virus. So I have big respect for the scientists in South Africa that have managed to discover this new strain, but it is impacting my my digital connections at the moment, unfortunately.
So you are trapped there and bound by the internet connectivity that you have available. So, hey, you know what? The timing was perfect though. Nothing like someone disconnecting right before the show goes live, but at least we had Greg. And it looks like you might have froze again, which is totally fine. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with Huw here. But let's shift gears to the icebreaker. He's back. He's back. He's fine. All right. So let's do this. Greg, I'm curious to hear where you landed on if you could be any video game character, who would it be and why? And you said there might be two, so I'm really curious where this lands.
Yeah, it's cheating, isn't it, a little bit having two? But I couldn't separate, and this is where it sits at the moment in my mind, and it might show my age a little bit here in terms of game characters.
It's fine.
So for me,
that's allowable.
The first one is Zelda. I know it's quite traditional, quite classic. But I remember when I was younger, I was obsessed with that game, like on all different platforms. So that's definitely one. And even I'm one of those sad people that when I play Mario Kart as well, I also have to be that same character in terms of Link. So Link is the character. Okay. That's the one for me. The other one I couldn't separate from is a Street Fighter character called Ryu. Now, again.
Oh wow, Street Fighter, bringing that. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. That was it. It was kind of one of those games again that I played hundreds and hundreds of times, when I was younger. Okay. So either Link or Ryu for me.
Okay, Link or Ryu. All right, Huw. I don't know if you are here or not, but if you are, let's hear where you landed.
I'm gonna turn on my camera. Can you guys hear me at all, or is this?
What I love about this is he sounds like a game character, right? It sounds like you.
It does. He very much sounds. Yeah, he very much sounds like that. So
I'm going to leave it.
Kind of hear you.
Sort this out and leave you guys to it.
He's jumping out, so I'm going to take over. We'll see if he comes back with this. So for me, video game character, who and why? I like this though, because now you made me second guess myself here, because I was actually going to originally do Scorpion from Mortal Kombat, but you know what? I'm not going to go. So mine is a little more custom. Okay, I told you mine wasn't like big name. Yeah. You're not going to see this. So I used to be a total World of Warcraft geek, big into World of Warcraft. And I won't mention what my nickname was in high school, but anyway, one of my characters was a variation of my nickname, so it was Lobbers. And anyway, I was a Frost Mage. I was a Frost Mage, and I loved playing my Frost Mage character, and pretty badass, character, undead Frost Mage. So to me, if I could become that, I would totally do it and just bounce around and do the things that Frost Mages do. So not really relevant or not big name, but wow, John Taylor, he knew the nickname. So this is that I was not expecting anyone to bring up my high school nickname. He did. No, he knows my high school nickname. So that is impressive. That John, good guess on that one. So check that out. There we go.
Well, no, Scorpion. I'll give you Scorpion as well. Scorpion is a cool character. Like Scorpion and Sub-Zero, they're on the much cooler edge than the Street Fighter gang. I'll give you that.
They are. Mortal Kombat, the finishing moves. Anyway, all right, we're going to end up talking about... Well, you know what? We are going to keep talking about games, though. That's the fun part of this conversation. We're going to keep talking about games. But before we do, a little bit about your background, because you're now in this immersive sim learning company, but is that your background? Like, how did you end up in that?
Yeah, good question. I think my original background professionally was in technology, but it was in those more kind of what I call corporate side technology. So SAP, Microsoft, Sun Systems, those kind of areas of business. So real business tech, essentially, in those kind of big management systems. And from that, I kind of did have a love of technology, and there's a lot happening in that space at the time that I was working in it, where everybody was moving to cloud, everybody was moving to SaaS, and there was all these different things happening that we were able to try and kind of pivot and have a look at how these big companies were doing that. And then a bit left field, I went from technology into hospitality. So I actually went and built my own hospitality business here in the UK. Saw a big opportunity based on some of the companies that I was working with, people like Brewdog and some other kind of big brewery companies, that white spirits were going to be quite a big thing, kind of the next big thing in drinks, really, like gin being the key one. So I went and built a distillery. I built tourist attractions and bars and kind of built that business out. So it kind of had this weird mixture of backgrounds, essentially. And then I exited that business a couple of years ago. And I wanted to get back into tech, and really ended up with Attensi because for the first time I'd seen a solution that could solve a lot of the problems I had when I was an operator. A lot of the training, a lot of the development issues, a lot of that engagement issues that we had, and actually how we use technology rather than technology being an end state, but how do we use it to drive that impact for a learner and also for the business. So that's when I came on board with Attensi about 2.5 years ago to head up that hospitality and leisure side of the business.
Okay. All right. How about you, Huw? How did you end up at a game-based simulation immersive tech company?
Who knows? Who knows, Chris?
Who knows?
I do need to comment on my internet situation now, because no one in the house is allowed to be on the internet anymore. When you disconnected last time, you said, "Get off the internet now!" Off the internet. We've only got 5 megabits, and it's all coming to me for this hour. So thank you for your patience and for everyone's patience on the call.
Welcome to 2021. So this is the internet age where everybody just rolls with it.
Exactly, net neutrality and all that. So I landed up in Attensi because of a really great guy by the name of Krista. We're a Norwegian business. Greg might have mentioned the call for international expansion was the UK. So he came across. We have some shared backgrounds, and he said, "Huw, why don't you come join me?" So I sat down for coffee. I was pretty tentative at the time. I was doing my MBA actually at London Business School, and I said, let me dip my toes in the water to see what's really going on here. And I joined them for a couple of months to work on a few specific things. And similar to Greg, from my background, I used to be at BCG. I was a management consultant, and I really loved working with organizations to understand what drives business performance.
Okay.
And the work that I was doing a lot of the time was, how can the people within an organization make an impact on their business performance? And I love doing the design around that, the strategy. But what I often found was missing is you get to the end of a project or the end of assignment, and you have a great PowerPoint deck or a great steerco at the end or a great board meeting. But then to get that behavior change and those capabilities actually into the organization was a big challenge for us. And Attensi's technology matched my skill set in having those conversations with business leaders to enable change, with a fantastic flexible technology platform that allows us to do that at scale. So that's how we ended up here.
We'll dig into this, because I think that point you brought up is a really important one when it comes to simulation, when it comes to anything like this, as we start talking about where immersive tech is going, is this fact of going from concept to behavior change. From somebody going like, that's a really good idea, I really should do that more, and actually doing that more. This is a space where I'm really curious to hear how you're helping with that, because to me this is one of the exciting parts about where we're going with tech. But anyway, some people, it's been a year. Huw, we were talking about this before you came on. It's been a year since you were on. So there's probably people who are seeing this who go, I don't, Attensi, like what? I got the gist of general things. But when you talk to people and they say, so you're with Attensi, how do you describe it to folks in a way that they go, oh, okay, that makes sense? And let's go with you, Huw, first, because your internet's working right now. So let's take advantage of it while it's working.
Who knows where we'll end up. So the way that I describe it is that we're a business that works very closely with organizations to understand what determines best practice. So what are the behaviors that determine best practice? What are the skills? What are the capabilities that are best practice? And we distill that then into a simulation that allows people to train in a realistic, immersive environment to build those skills and best practices that allow them to perform at the top. So it really is about moving your whole organization into a high-performance organization, often centered around a specific KPI that we are trying to drive. Okay.
Greg? Different, Ben? How do you describe it at a barbecue? Slightly different than Huw? Would the two people, if you were at the same barbecue, be like, oh yeah, no, their definitions are similar?
Yeah, I mean, very much so. I think it is that point, there's lots of overlaps, right? It's about that impact. We are a learning impact company, right? That is what we do. The tools that we use to deliver that is the simulation based training that we do, and that's scenario based. So we're trying to allow people to be in a safe space to train and fail and learn by doing. I think if we just take those principles a little bit further, that's what we're trying to empower. We're trying to empower the individual to be the master of that journey themselves, so they can go in, they can learn, they can fail, they can repeat, and we're trying to drive that essence within people of active learning. So we've all kind of grown up, right, with the same thing of we go and read something or we do a test, and that's just how society
lots of video,
engages in terms of knowledge.
That's how I know. That's how we've done it for so long.
But psychologically, what's really interesting about that is that it doesn't have the same level of impact as the type of training that we do with Attensi. So we are an empowerment, learning impact business at heart. So exactly as Huw said.
Okay. So Huw, I want to dig into what you brought up first, because I told you we were going to go all over the place, but I said your responses were going to dictate the path. Because one of the things you talked about with this simulation, and I think this is key, which we need to dig into here, is this identifying, I don't remember exactly how you said it, the behaviors that actually drive performance, right? That whole piece.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the reaction I see from folks when they hear simulation or is almost kind of like, I've done one of those before. And I'm in that camp. I've done simulations before. They go, this was a complete and utter waste of time because this didn't really connect to much of anything. And to me, when I've seen that, it's been, well, we designed a simulation based on, like, we just wanted to design a simulation. That was the goal, and we did it. and now we're wondering why it's not working. So let's talk a little bit about this, because there's not all simulations are created equal. And I think that's an important point to lay out, because if we don't, you're going to have this perception that, well, yeah, I've done that before, it hasn't really worked. And we're talking about how, no, that actually does have a dynamic impact. But if you get this wrong, it won't.
Absolutely. And this is so spot on. And it's a big piece of our...
Has he dropped?
Right at that moment. If he doesn't come back, Greg, take.
Oh, he's back.
No, now you're back. Now you're back. You're good. You're good.
Did you hear it? Yeah. So many clients have had these negative experiences with simulations before. I'd say there are two key components to creating a successful initiative around this. The first one is relevance and context. As you said, there's no, from our point of view, we don't create any off-the-shelf simulations, which is like, okay, here's an industry simulation, or here's the manager simulation, because there are lots of principles that are the same, but it is so much more powerful if it's in your language, in your context, facing with the challenges that your organization faces. And that's where our platform is so powerful, because it allows us to create that super rapidly. It's not starting months back trying to adapt all things. You can very quickly tailor these simulations to make it just like your own environment and your own challenges. And the second element that's key to a powerful simulation, and this is again a piece that we continually talk about our clients with, and I was chatting with Bob Gerard the other day, and he used the wonderful word, and it stuck with me. It's called effortful. Simulations need to be effortful. If it's something that's too easy, where you're just clicking through, you're going through the motions, I mean, in that flow state, that's where you need to be. But you need to be giving effort, and you need to be failing in many ways, as Greg had spoken to, because it's difficult, it's challenging, and that's how we all grow. And I think those are 2 points that we make sure that we anchor around to make sure you then have the impact out of a simulation that you're looking to get.
Okay. I love that you distilled it down to those 2 pieces. And again, if you just jumped in or just catching that, I think it's worth reinforcing in here, because those to me have been the differentiators, and I would be aligned to those factors in terms of this. Now, I want to unpack both of them a little bit, because I think there's a lot more meat in each of those as you go. But I think your point about this personalization, and hopefully we can get to the right degree, because I've seen 2 ends of the spectrum on getting it right. I've seen it, like you said, where it's just super generic. Oh, it's talking with a direct report, and you go, I mean, this is nothing like talking with any of my direct reports or anybody at this company, because this is clearly Bill from ABC company that, is saying the most generic things any employee would ever say that has nothing to do with an actual conversation. I've seen the other end of the spectrum, though, where it's like, well, that's not the kind of notepads that we keep on our desk. And we also need to make sure that, the sun doesn't come through the windows that way. And you go, okay, that is getting way too far on the specificity. So before we get into the kind of challenge of difficulty, Greg, I'll ping this one at you. How do you help organizations, or where do you find that right line? And I think there's some nuance in between, and I think there's value in kind of exploring that. But where do you see that spectrum sitting? Because I've seen it go polar opposites, and I would say on either end, it does not stick. It just doesn't.
Yeah, it's true, and we've seen the same, of course, outside of Attensi in terms of coming up against this. I think just to build a little bit as well on what Huw was saying, it's really, whatever it is you're doing as training, it's about being a scalpel, not being a brick. And I think that's the real key thing, right? Being that bespoke type thing. Because what we see so often is, that generic type.
I wonder how many guests we have Googling scalpel.
I was just going to say, that's like the hashtag of the episode. Be a scalpel, not a brick. There you go. I like that.
But it's so true. We see it so often. If you can be that precision type training, and the reason I say that is because, to your point, Chris, it has to start with the output of what that training is. That's where you need to start everything. What are you trying to achieve with either that simulation or that particular module or whatever it is that you're doing? Because that will most often dictate what that's going to look and feel like, and where on that scale that you should sit, essentially.
Okay.
So if we start at that point, which is where we always start with our customers and our partners that we work with, I think you tend to find it's very easy then to decide what's in, what's out, and where we should be focusing. Should we be focusing on that pad? Or there are other elements, as Huw was saying, to making this more difficult and more challenging. And actually that's going to drive that learning impact and business impact, hopefully, ultimately. Okay. So I think that's a good place to start.
I told you I'm going to jump in on this because you're be a scalpel, not a brick. Boss brought this up, and kind of his point is this effortful. I almost think of it as kind of intentionality. I think sometimes what I've seen with this is you end up with people trying to create a Franken simulation, right? It's like, while they're doing this thing, why don't we also have them practice this? And let's also build this into the sim, and why don't we also do, and you're like, okay, by the time we've done this, to your point, we're a brick, we're just trying to smash them with everything instead of saying, no, what are the behaviors and the situations we're actually trying to create change in, not the panacea environment we can create that hopefully turns them into a different person.
Yeah, and tech as well, just to jump in on that, tech should not be the end state, so to speak. And I think that's the other thing that's really important is don't get tech blind. I think we know how powerful the technology is when it's deployed correctly. But going back to what you're saying there, Chris, is sometimes, it does become of that thing of, I just want it in because it's tech, and I just want it in because it's great and it looks good and all those kind of things. And it should never be the end state, right? It's an enabler for what you're trying to achieve.
Well, and I think that point is a valuable one for folks who may be looking at this going like, I'm just getting started. I'm trying to think about where we even start with this. With a lot of organizations that I've led and worked with, we don't necessarily always start high tech out of the gate. We may start with, hey, we need to just even practice figuring out what this right situation and what this simulation is. And we may do it low fidelity to work out some of the details, and then we transfer it over to something more high tech that makes it scalable and more impactful. Because we've been able to validate that this actually is an impactful simulation versus going, I think the example before we went live where you go, we have to have a VR simulation. I don't really care what it is, but let's go find something and let's make it in that, and then let's hope that it works.
Yeah, I completely agree, and that's where we've actually seen a huge amount of success with clients who have tested something out before they bring in the technology platform. As you said, they've run this as whether it's a role play or whether it's a classroom session breaking out into different focus groups. And then we say, okay, well, the challenge now is scale. How do we scale this? And that's where technology can play a really huge role. And as I said, that's been a very sweet spot for us. I love your comment on the notebook and the lighting coming in. And it's something that the way that we talk about that with clients is like, what level of abstraction are we happy to create? How far are we able to abstract away from reality to still have that impact? And I think that's, at least when we talk with clients and internally, that's where we think VR is that's where we start thinking about VR is how, where do we need to get even closer to reality, get like less abstraction, and that's where VR becomes a really, really powerful tool. So we've seen that we do most of our VR work at the moment within clinical and more psychological basis, but we're seeing that now with the technology that's available and the distribution of hardware, both hardware and software, we're able to take things where even level of abstraction is not as important. We can use VR for that. So it's a very exciting development.
So let me ask you this, because this ties to this, and believe me, I haven't forgotten point 2, so we're coming back to it.
Okay.
But on this abstraction piece, there's 2 components, and this personally has always, because we talked about it in the very beginning, and more even so before we went live, was the fact that this is, in many regards, for professionals in the field, newer territory. We haven't always necessarily been focused on the actual simulation type behavior setting. It's been more content. It's been information architecture. What information do people need? How do we structure content? And now as you start stepping into immersive and sim-based, it's behavioral. It's very behavioral and environmental. And that's territory that may be unfamiliar for folks, which opens up 2 things. So I'm curious how you work with clients on this, because it's it's challenging to bring people along for this, because thinking about the behaviors, I have been in many conversations where it's, hey, we really should do a simulation, or we really should try and change behavior here. And you go, well, what behaviors are you trying to create? And it's just deer in headlights, like, I just want them to be better. Right, but what is better? What are the actual behaviors that represent better? And it can sometimes be like pulling teeth to get that out of folks. So how do you work with clients on that? Because I've had my tricks of the trade that have worked, but you're doing this on a massive scale.
Yeah. And we bring in the people who are much better at it than we are. That's the first ones that I would give.
In short,
I'm glad. Yeah,
we have
you said that.
Team of psychologists and content writers. I think it really is. It's the classic, like 5 whys or digging deeper. So say, okay, what does better? What behavior do you want to drive? Collaboration. Okay, what does collaboration mean? Oh, well, people like support one another, and they have the customer interest at heart. Okay, customer interest, that's really interesting. When have you seen people not put the customer interest at heart? Oh, and why is that? Oh, some of these things are organizational structures. Well, those we can't impact, so let's not train on those. And here are the real fundamentals of the training that sort of come out in that wash. But it is a painful process. But I must say, looking back, I think often clients, when they look back on having worked with Attensi for the initial project, they say that's one of the biggest value adds, is taking them through that process. And what I would say is also important is that we have a big focus on building that capability within the teams that we work with. So that then our technology platform can be used in a similar process by our clients, and they've gone through that structure of how do we get the best out of it. And to be honest, we find people really love it. The teams that we work with, the learning teams, love it because they get to be real partners for the business. They get to really challenge business owners, and whether it's the head of sales or the head of retail ops or the head of professional services, they get to challenge them and in some ways put them on the spot to get what they need. And the business people love it as well because they get training that is really impactful, and they get a thought partner who can spar with them. So it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but I'm very passionate about this, and I love it.
And it varies as well, I think, between sectors and between what we look at in terms of those areas, because very often those behavioural elements, when we look at maybe more my side of the fence with the hospitality and leisure, and I'd say just any kind of frontline operators somewhat, what we tend to do is almost like benchmarking exercises of what does good look like in your organisation right now in terms of that. So we're able to have access to a bit more data. What are the highest performing sites by whatever metrics you wanted to gauge? For example, is this site selling more coffee than this? And we start then working with the customer to understand what are they doing there, what's the leadership doing on that site, what are the front of house people doing at that site. And often when we go into these conversations, what we're looking to do is bring people that are already here. We know that we're benchmarking that behavior, they're the good behaviors, and we're trying to bring the rest of the estate to here alongside it. So we do a lot of that kind of work as well on the ground, front line, with the operators that we work with, to ascertain quantifiably, I suppose, in a little bit more depth, how do we get the rest to there? And it's about closing knowledge gaps, it's about closing behavioural gaps and those kind of things, Chris, that you're mentioning. But it's a really fascinating area for us, and it's really kind of why we get out of bed in the morning, I suppose, to work with people in that way.
And the relevance to this, Huw, I love that you brought up the value of this for learning to the business, because in terms of, you hear a lot of conversations around, well, we want to be a business partner. We want to be a partner to the business. And, a lot of times there's a struggle to figure out, well, how? And to me, my experience has been, this is one of the most powerful ways to do it, because actually sitting down and working, going back to my point earlier, where sometimes it's met with this deer in the headlights, I hadn't really thought about this. They find, my experience, if you do it right, is there is so much value that you're bringing to the table to actually help walk them through that exercise and say, I understand you're trying to get here, but I don't think we've thought through what are the actual levers and buttons we have to pull to get there. And actually getting them through that to the other side, I don't think I've ever walked out of a conversation or a situation where we've done that, where they've gone, well, that was a waste of time. Like I wanted them to just go make us an e-learning, and here they are trying to help us understand what actually makes the business improve performance. It doesn't happen. And your point about that being something that you can actually create into your behaviors as part of an L&D team to say, this should just be our mode of operation. This should just be how we approach, hey, we have this problem. Okay, let's talk about it. What's happening? What's going on beneath the surface? Help me understand what a good example of that looks like. Where is it going south? Describe that to me. That is a very powerful exercise that even improves your content development approach because you have a better understanding of what's actually happening.
Yeah, I 100% resonate with that. I mean, just to tell a little story, we're working with a large global insurer at the moment on this collaboration point. That's why my head went straight to collaboration, and we were actually delayed on the project by 4 weeks. So I was a bit nervous. I was like, this is we're taking our time.
We're behind.
What's really going on? We're behind. That at that 4-week point, I joined a steerco with the head of the group head of talent development and the head of the business that we're working within. And what the group head of talent development said is, we really love working with Attensi because they take the time to get to know our business. So I think that really resonates with people, that you are taking that time to create something impactful. You're not just putting down the first thing that comes to mind or lifting and shifting stuff into place. So that stuck with me. That's what's important. I mean, obviously we do deliver on time.
Well, yeah, that's not the point of the story. Is we're 4 weeks behind.
Yeah, I was going to say hashtag. It's rare, but I think as well, Huw, to sort of pick up, and we see this as well, don't we? In terms of when we talk about creating value with people and empowering people, we aren't just talking about empowering that frontline staff and the people that are going to be taking the training. We haven't done our job if we leave that project that we've delivered and those people that we've been working with are not thinking in a new way and are not embracing this new concept of how to learn and how to develop their team. And that's as much of the value that Attensi brings, as well as the platforms and the solutions, is our kind of holistic approach to empowerment, because we don't shy away from it. We are educating people during the project, because this is not a standard way of people thinking, right, Chris? And we were talking about this before. People think, put it there, tick a box, they've done it, and now go do a test. That kind of mentality is quite prevalent. As we know, we grow up with it. So we don't really feel that we have done our job unless we've empowered that team to go then empower others in that way of building their own content, as you said before. I think it's a really important point.
Well, and like I said, it affects every part of learning and development. I think sometimes people go into this thinking, well, we'll do this approach if we know we're going down a simulation path. And it's like, no, actually, this is how we should be approaching all major problems. And that is what helps you decide, is simulation a component that we need to include in part of the intervention, or is it not? Because you're actually unpacking what is actually going on here. What's actually happening, and what do we need to do about it, and what is the best way to approach a solution versus, let's just hammer down this path because this is what we've done before. Mm-hmm. So with that, because I think we could probably just finish the show on this topic, because this is a big shift, and for learning leaders who are going down this, I mean, and this is where I think the value you bring to an organization that this is new is tremendous. Not just in, hey, we make a product at the end that works really well, but the development for learning professionals is huge, because I've led this before with teams, and this is not a simple exercise if this is not your natural state today. And I think that point of your goal is that by the time you get to the end of this, people have changed their way of thinking, their way of approaching things, their skills in actual problem analysis. That's value add in and of itself. So with that though, because like I said, we could talk about this way too much, I want to talk about this component of the difficulty. Well, actually, before I do, and let me ask you this, because when it comes to simulation and figuring out these behaviors or these triggers or these components, one of the things that I've found that's been interesting is there are times, and the approach you have to bring to this is really important, because the conversation you described to you do that wrong and you risk pissing off your stakeholders. At least that's been my experience. You come into that conversation acting like, well, let me tell you what, you don't know what you're talking about. That's not actually the problem. Let me lecture you on what's going on here. My experience has been that conversation can either be one that really adds value to the business or one that really pisses them off, depending on how you do it. And one of the things that I've found has been curiosity, bringing into that conversation of genuinely trying to say, I'm not here to tell you, I'm trying to discover what this is an X factor. But I'm curious, one, is that something you've experienced? And two, are there any other components that you would share, either of you, that when you go into that conversation, people should be bringing so that it doesn't isolate or go south?
I would love to have something else, but I just underline curiosity. Like that really is, it is so key whenever we hire anyone. That is one of the really, really key things, because curiosity, it is asking good questions, and that's super important. But a curious person also will come up with hypotheses. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're back. You're the hypothesis. They'll come up with hypotheses. You did. It was like, what is he about to say? No, so they come up with hypotheses.
Exactly, and then you're testing those with your business stakeholder in a curious way, and that just shows, okay, you're partnering with me. It is that curiosity. Yeah. Anyway, I underline that. 3 times. Greg.
Yeah. No, but it is such an important point, and I think it's about leading people through discovery. Really, that's what we're trying to do. We know that that's a much more powerful way to prepare people for this is to allow them to discover it with us and discover, the power of what it is, and discover that they've got these issues and kind of uncover it. And it does come back to what we're saying about curiosity, but it's also the difference, of course, between dictation as well. I think if you go in there and I'm the expert, it's like, yes, we are the experts in what we do, but you're the expert in your business. And listen, what we're trying to do here is it comes back to that problem solve. We're here and you're speaking with us because you must have probably an issue somewhere, or something that you're doing in that environment is not working. Now, all we're trying to uncover is there a way here that we can help you solve that problem? And of course, this is all quite basic stuff, but it's the same whatever that technology, even when we're talking about simulations and the complexity of what we do, it's the discovery. It's also an excitement, I think, as well.
Yeah.
We have to spark an excitement in people. We're very lucky in this realm that we deal in, because visually it can excite people, but then it's really exciting them for change. That's the hardest thing that we ever have to do. Exciting people about looking at something, it's pretty easy, but exciting them to make the change is comes to those points that we just talked about.
I like that point, because again, the whole simulation thing, you can do a bit of a razzle dazzle, like, wow, that's really cool. But that other part of, hey, we're getting you excited about the change, it's more work, but I think when done right, it goes well. And I think the point that you've made is, I just can't reinforce it enough, because that conversation is so important. And the thing with curiosity, one of the things that I've seen where it breaks down, or there's just hesitancy for people to go into that, is curiosity also brings a level of humility to that conversation where, Greg, you said it. I'm not here to tell you what your business is. I am not the business expert. I don't know more than you. I'm not smarter than you. I'm not a threat to you as a leader. I'm truly here to try and understand, because you know this. My goal is to try and pull this out. And I think sometimes where people can feel that that's somehow less than, which is something I'm like, it's not, is that doesn't mean you don't bring expertise. It doesn't mean you're somehow less than. It's, no, your experience and expertise is different and of extreme value, and it actually helps identify who's responsible for what in this conversation. You're the business lead, you're the expert. I'm not here to question or undermine that, but I bring a degree of expertise in helping unpack and understand what's really going on there. And I think that just creates an environment that is much more productive.
And I think you've touched on something really important there, Chris, as well, is that we're not going in to say what you're doing is wrong. What we do at Attensi is cutting edge, right? It's brand new and it's really powerful. You're not expected to know that, right? It's like when you had training manuals, if you didn't know the internet existed or you didn't have a computer, it's not your job to know what that next step is, right? So we're not coming in to challenge you that what you're doing is wrong. We're giving you a choice. And it's the same way when, e-learning or anything digital came along and you had manuals. It's just a choice. And now you've got another choice. And this is the choice that we now have. And it's our job to show you why that choice is so impactful for what you do in your role. We're not coming here to say what you're doing is wrong.
Right. And I think that's an important point in his comment, right? The goal is to show them the art of what's possible and say, hey, you haven't done this. My goal is to help ask the right questions and unpack this and hopefully give you visibility into something you may not have had before. And that, what's interesting is I was going to ask this question before, but then it actually ties more into what we're talking about here, because the other component is this element of experimentation that's important, because my experience has been you don't always get it perfect in round one, and that's okay because we're trying some of these things. I think of one simulation exercise that I worked through where we thought there were 5 behaviors that we needed to work on. 2 of them proved to be completely irrelevant. But we didn't find that out till we ran with it and actually built it out and said, you know what, actually these 3 are the ones we need to dial in on. These other 2 we can kind of step away from. And we wouldn't have done that if we didn't have this mindset of we think we know, we found some things out, we're going to try this, but we're always iterating and learning as we go. We don't think like, well, we got it right, so it's all good from here on out.
Yeah, and I mean, iteration is so a key, and I think that's where one of the major leaps in the technology has been, because the platform can now allow you to render that simulation and test it, and then make some tweaks, and then render allows for rapid iteration. And then I had another point. What was that going to be, Huw? Rapid iteration.
While you're thinking about it, go for it.
I just came back.
I thought your internet had gone slow again, Huw.
It's just my brain. The other one was that we've built 450 simulations before.
Yeah.
So we have a good understanding of what works and what doesn't work. So again, we're not the experts on your business, but we know that trying to impact 7 behaviors in one simulation, it's gonna fall flat. And we have this experience that allows us to get closer to 100% correct on our first try, and that's extremely valuable when you're going through these processes.
Well, and what I was going to add on your point of the tech now allows you to iterate much quicker and much fast. This is one of the things that when it comes to immersive tech, I'm trying to break down in the industry, because there is still a lot of stigmas and perceptions that have carried into 2021 where people think, oh, this kind of stuff it's millions of dollars and we've got to get it perfect out of the gate, because if we don't, it's not going to work. And it's like, what? This is not the way it works anymore. We can actually do this in a rapid prototyping type environment now, where we think this is like 80%. Let's try this. Let's see where we go. Then we'll tweak and modify and go, and we can do this. I mean, you tell me if I'm wrong, because if you're like, no, actually, yeah, but that's been my experience, and this is something that is holding us back from embracing this completely different way of experience design.
100%. I mean, our sorry, Craig.
No, go for it.
Our first engagements with the client are a matter of weeks, and the bulk of that time is on that discovery. Let's call it the discovery of saying, what are the behaviors we actually want to change. The building of the simulation is super rapid. The platform's there. It's just pulling pieces into a simulation like you would in a PowerPoint. I mean, it's literally our latest tool. If you picture a whiteboard and you put up different stickies and you say, okay, someone makes this decision, someone makes that decision, and then they go here. And then if they go here, they get this email. And then if they answer incorrectly to that email, then this happens. It's literally designing a simulation on a whiteboard, pulling these different pieces together. And then you can say, actually, this didn't work that well, so let me pull that out and pull this piece in here.
Right.
And then you can run it.
Turns out we talked to them, or we dug a little deeper, and it turns out that actually that we thought it went this way, but it actually goes this way now.
Totally, and that agility is where the adoption is now coming from, and where that rapid adoption is going to be, and that's where we spend our time and money and effort, I suppose, in making that platform being able to move fast.
Okay. Well, and again, I think, as we think about this, just for folks who listen or watch this later, it's a different way of thinking about things, because Huw, your point of, okay, so this happens and then this email hits, and again, it's just an example, but this actually requires you to understand. We talk a lot about flow of work in the industry. A lot of times we don't take the time to actually understand the flow of work and say, well, what is going on? Do we actually know what happened? We make these assumptions from the Crystal Palace of, oh, well, I'm sure on the shop floor, this is what's happening. It's like, did we ask somebody who does this every day? Did we say, is this ever something that happens? I remember designing a sim for a commercial team, and part of the way through I said, did any of us actually talk to any commercial people who do this every day to ask, what happens when this goes on? Oh, I think that's probably an integral part.
I mean, I laugh there a little bit, because obviously, from an operator perspective, we of course see this all of the time. And the first thing that we do, both in early discussions, but also when we get into project phase, is this cannot be a top-down solution. It cannot go from top down into the organization, because you will fail and it will not hit and you will not get into the flow of work properly. And we always ensure that we have various different levels of the organization as part of that core project team. So someone that is on the front line every single day doing this, because as we all know, and we've been there ourselves, it's the nuances. It's that thing of what the reality is of flow of work, right? And then there's a balance, because it isn't just about what they're doing. It's also about what do they want them to do. And there is often a discrepancy between that we see.
That's why you're doing the simulation, because it's like, you're doing it this way, but that's not how we want you to be doing it.
And we play the mediator in that, right? It's our intelligence and it's our team that come to the board and try and bridge those gaps and find the best way to do it. But you will not, I don't believe, find a successful solution that's done from top down. I think you have to have inclusion from where it's ending up.
Well, and I like the way you framed that, because I think the nuance that you described is actually a really important piece, because the top down is the one end of the spectrum, where you have, assumptions made by someone, in some position over here, that, and we've all been in that simulation where you go into it and you go, this was designed by someone who has clearly never, ever, ever done this exercise or this activity before. They have no idea what I do. On the flip side, and I think this is the point you made, it's not about saying, oh, so we just have to copy or mix what they're doing today, because the point of doing this is we're trying to get them to do behaviors differently than they did before. And I think it's that right mix of, okay, we need input on where do we want them to be that they're not today, but it has to feel like what's actually happening in an environment, or what good would look like in the actual environment, not, well, that's what good looks like in a planet that is not in this solar sphere.
Completely. Yeah. And then you also have this concept of ownership, right, as well, which is really important for these things to land at scale in the way that we do. You need some form of that ownership down in the estate. From my side of the sort of sector, hospitality and leisure, and again, those frontline type operators in retail, you have to have some kind of ownership around that. And I think, we work really well. The ones that we see have the most impact are the ones that are created in that fashion.
Okay, so you talking about hospitality and retail, gosh, I knew we were going to run out of time, because I've got about 6 other things I want to dig into. But with this one, this goes back to another stigma I think we need to break with this whole idea of immersive or simulation-based learning type things, that I think a lot of people, I saw a recent study that went out where a lot of people seem to accept that there's value or purpose for it in high-risk situations, safety-type environments, where people can picture, okay, if we're asking people to practice going into a nuclear reactor that's about to explode, I can understand doing a simulation because we can't really replicate that. Connecting the dots to things more pragmatic and practical, like hospitality and retail, where you go, this isn't only for nuclear engineers who are trying to disarm a bomb before it goes off. This is also for folks on the front lines of retail, grocery stores, things like that. Like there is also tremendous benefit in these just practical applications.
Yeah, and I think often if we hear something like that, our challenge somewhat is, are you thinking about the learner and the person in that environment, or are you just thinking about it from your perspective, so to speak? Because when people are in those environments, and I've been in those environments, if the case is we're trying to create something here to give them that safe space to get things wrong and repeat, and and have that absolutely doesn't have to just be in high risk situations.
Yes.
It's the difference between high performance, I think, and then those high risks, and we have to look at the differentiators between that, because when you're dealing with a national operator, and we deal with a number of them, and you've got tens of thousands of staff, the learning styles, the way people learn, all of these different things that come together across that estate. The one thing that is very common is that if they can go and fail and repeat and fail and repeat, then they're going to get better, and they're going to be better, and they're going to feel more confident, and you've solved those problems that very often in that sort of frontline operator that you have. That's where simulations can sit. They aren't just for these super high risk scenarios at all.
No.
And we're seeing, thankfully now, more and more people understand that, I think, a bit more than they did. But there is still a stigma attached to it. And I think a lot of that's to do with price points.
Well, and I think some of it goes back to even this term of creating a safe space for people to fail. I think there's greater awareness over the last 2 months on this, but I think before, even that type of terminology made people's minds go to, safe space, because if it's not safe, they're going to get impaled on something.
Yeah.
And it's like, no. There seems to be a greater awareness of EQ and just people in general, where it's like, people need a safe space to practice checking out a difficult customer, because do you really want them practicing on a person? Is that really where you want them to practice that? The safe space does not just mean highly dangerous, highly volatile, not literally safe space where it's dangerous.
No. Yeah, psychological safety.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, FIFA is a safe place to fail, because if you go up against the best teams in FIFA, you'll lose. If you go up against you're not going to win it on the first time. Assassin's Creed is a safe place to fail, because you won't get that right the first time you play the game. And I think that's, Chris, tying back to your point on difficulty, I think that's a key point where we blend gamification into simulation.
Yes.
And gamification, people think stars and banners and confetti, and we have that can be used. But it's creating this game. If you think of Assassin's Creed, you try level 1, you're not going to win level 1 on the first time. You will get kicked out, and you will go back and you'll repeat, and then you'll learn how to play this game. And that's what we're doing with checking out a difficult customer, with having a sales conversation with a new client. We create these environments where people are, it's so close to their reality, so that they can apply what they learn to reality, but it's fun, engaging, and it gets people to repeat, and it is that safe space.
Well, and you did it. I was about to take us there, but thank you, Huw, because you actually brought it right back to this. Because I think that component of difficulty is another opportunity area where we miss sometimes. Like we've all done that simulation where you could do it in your sleep, because you go, oh brother, like this is, I don't need to give an analogy, because we all know what I'm talking about, where it's designed to be so easy that you go, this was dumb. This wasn't challenging at all. And I just think back, we talk about the video game component. If you haven't played a video game and turned on God mode, try it. And you'll see that your entertainment level and value just goes down the toilet, because you go, well, this isn't any fun. Like, I can literally just curb stomp everything in here because nothing hurts me. I can blast through all the levels. I can fly over everything. I can do... This isn't a challenge anymore, and those games like whatever, you no longer are entertained, and they don't challenge you to get better, because they aren't actually pushing you to get better. There's nothing in it that causes you to fail.
Yeah. So fundamental to what we do. That whole principle there is so fundamental, and you're not going to learn. You don't learn if you're not challenged, and I think that's, I think we see that more and more now. That people want to be challenged in a positive sense. They want
in
to
a
be
positive
challenged.
sense.
And also, I would say on this, and Huw, I know that you see this probably more so on in terms of where you work and what you do. The other thing is with the simulations we create is you do take away a lot of this element of meeting bias and workshop bias, and we know that blended learning is really important. But still today, when you go into a workshop and there's 10 people as an example, and you're trying to run through a scenario and you're trying to do role plays in those, you will get meeting bias, which is the loudest voices will be heard the most, and the voices in there that aren't as confident will tend to shy away. And are they learning at the same pace? And how do you track how quickly they're learning? What we're able to do is extrapolate that out and put them into environments that feels collaborative, but ultimately they're masters of their own environment when they're doing that, and you don't see those biases, and you can see the tracks they're going through, and you can see the completions and the scores, and it allows you to see people in a much truer light, I think.
Well, and this point goes back to the simulation and why, there have been times I've been said, well, can't we just do a role play? Doesn't a role play just work for this? And it's like, well, I mean, a well-designed role play is a good starting ground. We talked about it earlier in the show. Can it be a really powerful starting ground to start saying, like, how am I thinking about simulation and the behaviors that matter? And can we create an environment where people can practice this? Yes. So I don't like to kind of poo-poo on that idea, because it's like, well, no, that's actually a really great starting ground if you're not familiar with this territory. How do you actually think about role play design as you do this? But to me, the technology component that we just have hit on so many different levels is what allows you to adapt and pivot, remove some of the bias, make it difficult or less difficult depending on the individual, actually pushing them through the right level of challenge. Because going back to the video game analogy, just like you'll get bored out of your skull if you turn on God mode and play for 5 minutes, if you go in and in the first 30 seconds you're getting sniped in a game, and you just like spawn in and boom, you're dead before you even know what happened, you're going to throw your controller at the TV 5 minutes in too and go, forget this, like I'm not playing this game either. And that balance of has to be challenging enough to push you where you aren't comfortable while not pushing you so hard that you just go, I can't win. Okay.
100% agree with that.
Really.
100% agree with that. And I think even taking it up a level is the context in which you're using simulation. So one thing is that experience itself, but how are you framing that? And that's one thing we have to work with our clients a lot, is almost setting that expectation for the learner, because the learner's used to going through a training and at a quiz or at anything where it's interactive, they'll get 80% right. And they're like, whoa, I got kicked out on level 1. We need to set that expectation with them. You're not going to get this right on the first time. You will fail, and you will come back and you'll learn how to play and you'll learn how to improve. And that's the value of this experience. But it's an important part of any rollout that we do, is that communication.
So and I'm going to close on this note, because otherwise we're just going to go way, way, way over time. But that component, first of all, anybody watching, listening, a point of what, if you want to use the formal learning piece, this zone of proximal development, where it's like we're pushing you into this ideal zone where you're actually developing not too hard, not too easy type thing, is important. But the expectation setting around that can be a make or break for the success of an implementation of this, because we have in many regards in our organizations trained the workforce that just plow through it. You don't really need to pay attention, because you're going to get to the end. You're going to get 97 tries on the quiz, and we're going to show you the answers, and you can review the quiz when you get to the end. And so that's the expectation we've created. And if we don't reset that expectation, I find the same thing happens in virtual learning. If you don't tell people this is going to be interactive, and if you multitask, you're not going to do well in this, they don't do well. And the same's true with Sims, where it's like you have to set expectations that you're gonna tank, just so you know. And they're okay with that if you let them know. If you don't, you're gonna get some nasty feedback.
And it is so important, because once we get over that first launch hump, we see it across all of our solutions, with all of the sectors, with all of our customers, a resounding, this is the way I want to learn. Like this is it. This is how I want to learn. This is, the way I want to learn. But it is that first interaction with it as a new solution is so critical. but we do see that then, that people do want to learn this way. And I think that's a really key thing that I want to get across today as well, is this is what we see, even from senior people within organizations.
Yes.
You know, senior partners, senior MDs, senior directorship, they all come back with the same feedback. Why have we not been doing this to this stage? If you can get them over that initial education hump.
Yep, the initial hump is probably the hardest, but once you get there, I feel like nobody ever looks back and go, can we get rid of this? Can we just go back to, you know, the like plowing through PowerPoints and then quiz at the end? Yeah. So, all right, I'm going to stop because we're going to go way over. But this has been fantastic. Huw, you know what? This worked great, even with the spotty internet connection. You know, it kind of gave an element of flair in terms of, what was he about to say? So I like it. I like it. Maybe we'll do it again. So thank you both for being here, for making the time, especially because I know it's much later on Friday for you than it is for me. Hopefully everybody watching got something valuable out of this, that it's changing the way you're thinking about simulation, technology, what we can do, because there is a bright future ahead, but we have to be willing to operate differently and think differently about it. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Friday and a great weekend.